My favorite food is ice cream. My favorite book was Pensees, Spensees, by Blaise Pascal, who is a French author. And about, I guess he wrote it Pensees about in the 1700s. My favorite movie is Billy Budd. And the reason I liked it is because it's a short story written about a sea, and the acting. Not only is the book great, but the acting in the movie was fantastic. My favorite saying is, "Know thyself, and to thine own self be true, and thou cannot be false to any man." That's from Shakespeare. At Sugarloaf Hill was the defining battle of Okinawa, in which we broke the resistance of the Japanese. It was a battle for a hill that dominated the southern part, and the Japs were dug in all along the top of the small hill, actually, and it had several hills around it. And we attacked it for several days and never took it. And my company was on the left flank approaching the hill, and we attacked on that day. And my company, I proceeded up the Crescent Hill as a flanking company to protect the troops advancing on Sugarloaf. And my company, when I got, they were following me up this hill, and by the time going through the valleys, I was shot at, and I had holes later. I found them in my trousers. I had my first aid kit shot off, and I had a couple runners with me and my radio man. And by the time I got to the top of the crescent, I didn't have anybody there. They were all shot. I was the only one there. I lost all my assistants, and I was in an untenable position. So I just left and went back on down the hill. We couldn't take it, and it was during this battle that the 29th Marine Regiment suffered the greatest number of casualties of any regiment in Marine Corps history. We lost or killed or wounded at least 80% of the regiment, and a regiment consists of between 3,500 and 4,000 troops. But eventually, after a number of attacks, with support from airplanes and artillery and so forth, we were able to, and the riflemen advancing around the right flank, we were eventually able to take Sugarloaf Hill, and the Japanese withdrew to the southern part of the island. That had but they counterattacked several times, but that essentially broke their back, and they withdrew to the southern part of Okinawa, and cliffs, and eventually we moved over there and took control, and my company captured at that time the greatest number of Japanese prisoners up to that time in the war. I think we captured about 90. When we were we had a man with a megaphone who was trying to call them out. They were in the deep grass, and if they tried to surrender, some of their own people killed them. But we took the number of, it was written up in the AP and UP press all over the country, what we had captured. And a lot of my men who were already wounded in the hospitals across the country read about our company and me and what we had done, and they were just buoyed beyond measure. They wrote me later letters, and but anyhow, the Japs, the ones that did surrender, we treat with. I mean, we obeyed the law, the international law about prisoners of war, but we got very few of them. But by that time, they were jumping off cliffs into the water. There's steep cliffs in the southern end, and one of the tragedies of the war was the day the island was secured. Our general, lieutenant general, was observing the operation, and he got shot, and he died, and he was the highest-ranking military man killed in World War II. My company also cleaned out other areas in the southern part before we declared the island secure, which I think was declared secure at somewhere towards the end of June 1945. And after that, we went to a rest area, and we were given, and we also went over to see the, we had a cemetery there where the men were buried. We visited that, and then later we boarded ship for Guam, where we were going into a staging area prior to attacking the Japs, land attack in the spring of the following year. I mean, I guess it was in January of '46, but when I was in Guam, we had a staging area where we were getting ready to, had a rest area for a while, and then I was relieved in my as company commander because I was a first lieutenant, and so they brought in a full captain to be the company commander. But it was while on Guam in August that we dropped the atomic bomb, and that ended the war. And I was lying in bed and in my tent, and I had sprained my ankle playing volleyball, and I jumped with joy and went down the steps, fell down the steps, because everybody was so happy that the war was over. I was relieved of my command, and then I was given the option to get out of the service because I had so many points, and I'd been in it for so long that I was one of the first contingents that left the Pacific to be discharged from the Marine Corps. I didn't want to stay in the Marine Corps. I found it was too political and too many lazy people who were always jockeying for a position, and so that sort of disturbed me. But anyhow, I boarded a aircraft carrier, one of those smaller aircraft carriers, and from Guam, and then I'm telling you, it was amazing because here we are on the aircraft carrier in the mess. That's the dining room. At night we had food galore, all kinds of good food, and then we had waiters who waited on us at the table, and silver. And I thought, my God, I'm back in civilization. And they had a library, and I could read books. So I guess it took several weeks to get to San Francisco. We stopped in Hawaii on the way back, and I spent a day there. Then I finally came into San Francisco. It was just horrendous, the waves. And I had a bunk on the bow of the ship, and I felt like a pancake all the time, like I'd being turned over all the time. But anyhow, we got into San Francisco, and that's the first time I'd been there. And we went under the Golden Gate Bridge. I never went over it, but I went under it. And I was assigned to the Palace Hotel for over a week while they were drawing up papers for my discharge. Well, I finally got out, and I remember San Francisco was always foggy up to about noon, and there was always night sirens, fire sirens, and I remember climbing the hills, and they're very steep, and the cable cars. So I thought San Francisco was quite interesting. But anyhow, I left that. I got aboard a train, and headed for Chicago. So I went across the northern part of the country, and I was very relieved. And I was thinking of how, looking out the window, how beautiful and how vast our country was, and how wealthy, going through all those lands, like in Iowa, and the farmlands and so forth. And I was on my way home, but I didn't have a home. Actually, my father died, and there was no home for me, except my brother Andrew, who was 4 years older, invited me to stay with him. And so I went to stay with him in Mountville, Ohio. It is a 40-acre spread, old farmhouse he lived in, and he was in the trucking business. And I got home, and I was thrilled to be able to go get beer when I wanted it and drink it and just relax. And in the meantime, I had saved up about $4,000 or $5,000. I was in my bank account because I didn't have a place to spend the money. So I decided I'm going to get my education because I've always wanted to go to college. Of course, I couldn't when I was younger because I was too poor, and they didn't have the scholarships and entitlement programs then that they do now. So it's very easy now to get an education, but then it was very difficult. But anyhow, on the GI, I applied to Georgetown University because a friend of mine had graduated there and had good contacts. And I was considering Notre Dame and the University of Chicago, but I decided on Georgetown University because I knew Washington. I had friends there because I was stationed in Quantico when I went to officers training, which is not far away. So I liked Washington, D.C., so I decided on Georgetown University, which is the oldest Jesuit college in the United States. It was founded in 1789. Actually, George Washington spoke on the steps of Georgetown University. I entered Georgetown University on the GI Bill, and I had the $4,000 in my pocket, but by the time I ended, I didn't have any money left anyhow because Georgetown's a very expensive school. But anyhow, how I got through was I had a job. They gave me a job, paid me my room and board. I was a prefect of a dormitory, and I had to keep track of the people coming in and out and so forth, which I did. And that pretty much paid for it, and along with the GI Bill, and then the $4,000 I used up. But I don't begrudge that because that's what I wanted to do anyhow. And so I took accelerated courses. I was a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service, and I took accelerated courses. I went all through the year, even the summer months. So I finished Georgetown University in 3 years. And I would say my average was about A- when I graduated. And it was during this time, about my first or second year at Georgetown, that I met Alva, and she was going to Georgetown Visitation, which was a Catholic preparatory school equivalent to a first and second year college level, run by the nuns, which is an very, very old school. And they were next door to Georgetown, and they would have tea dances on Sunday afternoon. And I remember going, one day came down in the afternoon to go to the tea dance to check it out. And as I walked into the door, there was a girl standing there with some of her friends. She had a sable coat on, and I heard this Southern accent. So I was bewitched by this soft Southern accent. And this good-looking girl, she was very good-looking. Alva was very good. She looked like a movie star. And I looked at her, and we, just batted back and forth. And finally I said to her, well, would you like to dance? And she said, well, I'm not a very good dancer. I said, well, that doesn't make any difference. I am, and we'll work it out. So we went, and that's how I met her, and I was just fascinated by her. And she was such a nice person, and very sweet, and always smiling. And she just, we started dating, and I think we dated for about 3 years. In the meantime, she graduated from visitation, and she was heart sick because she had to go back to Tallahassee. And she talked her father into sending her back to Washington, D.C., where she entered Dunbarton College, which is on Massachusetts Avenue. It's not there any longer. So she came back to be with me, and she and I used to, we didn't have a car, but we went around on buses and streetcars, and we went to, we dated, there's a lot of freebies in Washington. We went to Constitution Hall, listened to concerts, Watergate concerts. We would go to the National Gallery and on Sunday afternoons and sit and have something to drink, and we just hit it off. And I remember one day we were on a bus, and I think I just picked her up, and she had this sable coat on, and I was snuggling up to her, and I kept smelling mothballs. I said, well, you're just filled with mothballs. But anyhow, we had a lot of friends. We did quite a lot of partying. And we used to go to the beer hall near Georgetown, and I would sit there and charm her with the war stories and stuff like that. I think she was overwhelmed, but I know she felt for me very quickly. I mean, I sensed that. And being a male, and I was 27, and I just, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I didn't have a job or anything, and I didn't have any money. And, but anyhow, we fell in love, and I asked her to marry me. And in the meantime, her mother came up. Her mother then was about 1940. Her mother must have been about 45, and she was a good-looking woman, and she was really sharp. And she liked me, and we got along real well. And I said to her one day when we were walking, I said, I don't know whether to marry you or your daughter. I think she liked that. But I always got along with my mother-in-law. I always admired her, and I always got along with her just well. I never heard a harsh word from her, ever. So I guess that's unusual. But anyhow, she came up and put a sign of approval on me, and after I asked her to marry me, I didn't have any money. But she went home, and they set up a date for our marriage in Tallahassee on November 20th, 1948. And I didn't have any money, so I called my brother Andrew, and I says, can I borrow $400? I said, I've got a bonus coming from the state of Ohio, a veterans bonus, and I'll pledge that for the loan. And so he loaned me $400, and that was how I was able to get to Jacksonville and Tallahassee. I thought, well, if my father-in-law knew that I was this broke and borrowed money to get married, he wouldn't allow it, because he was kind of straight-laced. He's the old school, Victorian school. But anyhow, if you don't do it, you don't do it. I mean, you have to make your mind up to do it. So we just got married in Tallahassee, and had a nice ceremony there. The Attorney General came, and a lot of nice people. And then we had a reception at the Mistletoe Plantation out of Tallahassee. There were some friends of the family and then they gave us a car, a brand new Chrysler from a family dealership. I mean, a dealership that was friends of the family. They loaned me a car, brand new Chrysler, convertible, and we took our honeymoon in Destin, near Destin. Bacon by the Sea is the name of the place. So we went there for about 4 or 5 days, and then we returned back to Tallahassee, then to Jacksonville, and stayed with Alva's grandmother, Mrs. Florine Tupper. She was Alva's grandmother, and we stayed there, and then we took the train on back to Washington, D.C., and arrived there on Thanksgiving Day, and had dinner out on a restaurant. That's our Thanksgiving. It was a good Thanksgiving dinner. I had a job by then. See, I wouldn't have married if I hadn't had a job. I had a job working for a carpet store. It was owned by two hotshots. One of them was an older man, and the other one was a graduate of Georgetown. And they had asked me early on if I would like to work and have a job. I said, well, yeah, that's fine. I never thought I'd be a salesman, but I found selling very invigorating. And I did work at that job. And Alva and I had an apartment on Kennedy Street in Washington, D.C. But after about 6 months, they transferred me to Philadelphia Main Line, where I would manage the store there for a while. Well, in the meantime, my bosses, I guess they thought they were going to get rich. As after the war, pent up demand, people wanted things, and they just thought, we'll just put it out there and sell it. And we did very well, as a matter of fact. But what they did, they weren't paying their bills. It was awful, and I don't know what they thought. I learned a lot by being around them, but anyhow, so things were getting tight for them. So they called me back from Philadelphia. Johnny was born then at Fitzgerald Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia. And I remember Alva, I wasn't there at the time. I was in Scranton on a bus coming home reading Shakespeare. And Alva had our decorator put together in our small car, bumpity bump over the road, so she was having a baby. And Alva said, she was looking out the window all the time going, she says, I hate men, I hate men, I hate men. Okay, we left Philadelphia. They called us back to Silver Spring, Maryland, where the original store was, and it wasn't long. We were living then on Sligo Creek Parkway in Silver Spring, Maryland. We had a two-bedroom apartment, and by that time we had 3 children. We had Johnny, Teresa, and Bill. Bill was about, I would say, 6 months old. And then one day, I went to the store to open it up, and I saw this notice on the front door. It said, closed, and they had padlocked the store because of defaults on debts, and I guess they had to declare bankruptcy. But here I am. I had no indication of it, although I knew their company was having trouble because I could feel it. And because the reason I felt it is because if I sold merchandise, I couldn't get it. It took forever to get it. And I said, there's something wrong here. And what has happened, These guys, number one supplier was Bigelow Carpets, and they were in debt to them to the tune of $200,000, which was a lot of money then. So they closed the store. Here I'm left. I have no money. I have 3 children. What am I going to do? That was a horrible feeling. Then the people who owned the paper, that is they sold their paper that, when you sell a job, they would sell the paper to somebody else and get money from it. They discount it. And these people, this is an acceptance company, asked me to collect on bills that were still owed to the carpet company. So I said I would do that. And by doing that, I earned, which was pretty a lot of money then, $500. Well, so I was able to, in the meantime, the Lord moves in mysterious ways. In the meantime, a friend of my father-in-law, Frank Heinz, a man named Al Laney, had gone to the number one carpet store in Jacksonville, Dubard's, and asked him if they needed any help. And Dubard had just lost his main man. And since Mr. Laney was well known in the community and recommended me, he said, yes, he'd like to interview me. So within 24 hours, after losing my job in Silver Spring and everything else, within 24 hours, I would, or a little longer maybe, I was hired. I had another job, and I asked for more money and got it. So isn't that something? So I had enough money to pack up what we had and rented a house in Jacksonville on Dancy Street. And we moved here, and we had 3 children. And boy, I thought, oh my God, the sun is shining here, and I've got a new job. And this all happened so fast. It was just miraculous how it turned out. And then, of course, I was relieved. So I went to work for Dubard Floor Covering, and they had a very good reputation. The man who owned it was very provincial. By that I mean he didn't think much beyond the city or anything else. I mean but he had a good sense of business. He paid his bills. We advertised. I mean, he had what, in a business acumen, what my previous employers did not have. So I learned a lot from him too, and I got along with him very well. And he let me know that I was his fair-haired boy. And soon I was making more money than my father-in-law, who was Assistant Attorney General of the state. So I was making a decent living then on sales, and we were in good shape. I think, and Alba was so happy to be home because she has so many friends here in Jacksonville because she was born and raised here. And so they welcomed her back, and she got into the junior league and made all her contacts. And all her contacts, family contacts, they helped me in business too, because I ended up doing a lot of business with people who were friends of her family. I was extremely active. I don't know how I did it. I was a big brother of the year, one year, and I had these little brothers. When you're younger, you can do a lot of things. I mean, there's no into it because you got the energy to do it. And so I wanted to learn to paint because I've always felt an artistic bent. So I went to the museum and took lessons in painting. So I was very active in a lot of things. Plus the children. We would take them to the beach on the weekends. Johnny was born in Fitzgerald Mercy Hospital in South Philadelphia. And I think his best qualities were that he's got an analytical mind. He loves to read. He likes to argue. So that's the reason in later years I said you'd be a good lawyer because you can argue, and so I think that's his best qualities. Now Teresa was born in Columbia Women's Hospital, which is almost diagonally across from the White House. I don't know if it's still there or not, but her best qualities are she's a very generous person, and she's very smart, and she's well-read. Bill was born in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and he was, his best qualities, I would say, are his resourcefulness. He's very resourceful, and you never seemed to have to tell him to do his homework or anything. He seemed to know what was right and best for himself, so his resourcefulness pays off with his very successful law practice later on. Frank was born in St. Vincent's Hospital. I think the total bill for Frank was probably $200 at that time. Room and board for Alva was $7. Gosh, and but Frank's best quality is his bon vivant. He loves life, and he makes friends easily, and he has a lot of good common sense. Christopher was born in St. Vincent's Hospital, and his best qualities are doing his own thing. I mean, he was very independent, and I think that's his number one quality, is independence and wanting to be on his own. And Mark was born in St. Vincent's, and Mark's best quality, again, is he's similar to Frank in many ways, but Mark is very, very, I think very intelligent and very outgoing and hardworking. All my children are hardworking, I'll say that. They all have that quality of being able to work. Eventually, my career led me to Carpet Concepts, and I was very successful, and I managed it, pretty much managed it, because we did tile work, and we had a pretty good business, and I was paid well, and but and I did the advertising, so I learned a lot of things about running a retail operation because I had to do a lot of buying. I went to the market in Chicago and New York and was a buyer, and I did all the advertising for the company and so forth, and I was very valuable. And but after a while, Mr. Dubard didn't have very good health, and eventually he was doing less and less, and I would be doing more and more. I would work 3 nights a week to 9 o'clock just to keep it going. And after a while, it became, I was almost completely in charge. But he eventually, he had an operation on his throat because of a cancer of the throat and his esophagus, or they cut it open here, and he had to use a device to talk, and it's almost hard to hear him. And he would come into the office, and I'd say, oh my God. And then I finally said one day, I want to buy out this business. I'm going to make it. I forced him earlier on because I knew, I was having a family, and I got to do something here. I was about 45, and I forced him to give me 1/4 of the business. So I got, he had made the company into a corporation. It hadn't been a corporation before, it was a proprietorship. So he made it into a corporation, and I was issued 25% of the stock. And that kept me going, see. So I thought, I got an investment in here. I'll just do it. But after he had his operation and he would become his wife worked in the office, he became a pest in a way, more demands on me, and he'd sometimes come out and try to talk to the customers with that device. And I finally said to him one day, I said, you know, I want to buy out this business. You can have an office here. You'll be okay. I said, but I want to buy it out. I want control of it. He had something in his hand. He slammed it down on the floor and he said, never, never will I give it up. That's more part of his provincial. So he said, get out, get out. So I said, well, you know, I've got children to support. He didn't know this, but I had about $10,000 in the bank. And I said, I've got children to support. How about some upfront pay? He said, no, get out, get out. Well, I did. I got out. I went home. And then later on, I said to myself, well, I'll go back and see if we can work this thing out, maybe after a little sober thinking. So I went back to talk to him, and no, he would have nothing to do with me. Well, that was it. So what I did, Johnny has to look after himself. I went to my lawyer, Ed Mulcahy. He was a good friend of the family's too. And I told him the problem. I said, you know, they're a corporation. They haven't had a board of directors meeting. And I own 25% of the stock. And I want my share. And I said, I want out of it. And I say, threaten him. I mean, because he's in violation of the law. And so he did. And so Dubard gave up the 25% stock. He wrote me a note, pay at the bank, and I went and discounted the note and got money out of that. Well, I had that money, and I had some money. Alva and I have saved up. We always saved up money. I guess we're tight, but anyhow. So I took that money and opened. I had a good friend, Thomas Ulmer, was a very big, shot in Jacksonville, and his family was in the real estate business. And he got me a store downtown, and I opened it up there, Carpet Concepts, and it is today. After 46 years, it's still going strong. And we started there in 66, I think it was. I was 45 years old. So I made my choice. Incidentally, if you're going to start a business, you better know what you're doing. I had planned everything out. I had experience, so I knew the business. So I had all the attributes, and I had enough money to start the business, because I loaned the business out of my own funds about, I guess, $15,000. And then I had the stock that I got from Dubard. So I was able to get, I had enough money for the first 6 months, and the business took off. And eventually the store where I was at was sold, and the bank was built there. So we moved out to St. John's Avenue shopping, and we were there for a number of years. And the business was doing okay. We did all right. In 1972, Alva and I took a trip to Spain for a week, which we had won. And then also, a little later, we took a trip to England for a week, which, again, I won it. And, but anyhow, in 1981, the business was doing very well. And Alva and, so Alva's junior, my daughter, she was a librarian in Florence, Italy, for the overseas study program for the University of Florida State University. So she had to see us there 6 months at a time. So she invited us over to visit. So we went there for 2 weeks. We went to Florence, Italy. Well, during this 2 weeks time, I get a call. Oh my God, it was the worst day of my life. So our warehouse, I had about $30,000 worth of carpet in the warehouse. Consigned, it was to be installed in a big commercial job. They called me and said the warehouse had burned down or burned out. All the stuff was gone. Well, I had somebody, and I called him, Scott Smith, and I said, well, the first thing to do is take care of your customers and go ahead and reorder the carpet that's destroyed so we can get the job done. So the funny thing about it is I was just like a zombie, because after that I went to Venice, we went to Assisi and to Rome. But anyhow, that was in the back of my mind all the time. Was my business going to survive? Well, again, I think the good Lord looked after me, because it was one of the most profitable years of my business. And with that profit, I was able, I mean, I had to eat it all up because I had to use it to buy new carpet, but I was able to restore the carpet and get it installed and taken care of. But in the meantime, I think it was Travelers Insurance, I had to ask the warehouse. The warehouse could have paid me $10,000 right off the bat, but I refused that. I said no. I said, so I went to court. Unfortunately, I had a lawyer who was in the real estate business, didn't know what for a hole in the ground. And but anyhow, I sued Travelers, and one of the worst things in the world. Don't sue if you have to. But anyhow, what caused the fire? They was trying to say, Travelers said, well, it was arson. Well, they don't have any entry where anybody entered the warehouse or broke into it, or no accelerants to start the fire. So they didn't have anything to stand on. And the man who operated the machinery, the forklifts and so forth, he smoked all the time in the warehouse. And he admitted it in court. And I can't believe this, that the fire marshal, whoever it was, said, when he got him on the stand, he said he thought it was arson. Well, they didn't have any clue that it was arson. There was no proof of it. And then they put me on the stand and they said, well, where were you when the fire started? Here's this big rich son of a bitch. Well, he's over there vacationing in Italy. Then they put the kid who took over the warehouse. He was probably in his 30s. He was a nice guy. They asked him, well, where were you when the fire started? Well, I was at a prayer service on my way back. And when I heard about the fire, I went over there. And so in other words, he dropped a big tear. I was a big executive who could absorb all this. So they went to the jury, and you know what? The jury was a hung jury, because one man in the jury refused to believe him and held out. So here I am again. Now I'm going to go do all this trial again. I've already spent about $10,000 and wasted all this time. And I found out one thing about the thing. I had received a letter from the warehouse in my files that said, you are covered by insurance. So I felt secure. That's one of the first things I do. And then I come to find out Travelers had issued a policy for the warehouse, and the policy didn't have me named in there as a beneficiary. Well, because of that, the judge didn't allow it in the evidence in the court. So all the evidence showed that, I really was working on the assumption that I had insurance. But Travelers has a lot of money, and they know how to work the system. And the damn judge, God, she was awful. Okay, in spite of the judge not ruling in my favor in anything, at least I had one man, I thought of the jury that, it'd become a hung jury. So I had to go to court again. Eventually, I got a new lawyer. Bill got me the man. I knew him very well. His name was Dawson, and he's one of the most respected lawyers there is. And he took the case, and we went to court. They settled on the courthouse steps that the Travelers said, well, they'll offer me $23,000. And I said, okay. And he told me, I said, you go ahead and take it. It's the best thing you could probably do. So I did. I took the $23,000, and then I took the rest of it as a write-off over the years. So actually the company didn't lose any money over the long term because he could take it as a tax write-off, the balance of the loss. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that I guess if you get, you're better off. I would have been better off to take the $10,000 the warehouse offered me in the beginning and save the $10,000 and all the time involved instead of getting into that court battle. But I just was very turned off by the courts. We had to get out of the store downtown because they built a bank there. And so we moved out to St. John's Avenue and opened a small shop there, which was our main headquarters. Now, Alva was a co-founder of the business, and she was very active once the children were raised. She was very active. She was a marvelous bookkeeper, and she just kept great records and helped. She didn't like sales, but she was always there to greet people with her smile, and but she enjoyed the business part because I think getting away from raising children was a big bonus for her. But anyhow, she was very valuable in the running of the business, and we paid her a small salary, and she had a profit sharing plan. She was part of our profit sharing plan. Then Mark finished FSU with a business degree, and he came and I hired him. We opened a new store in Lakewood. So when Mark joined the business, I told him, the first thing I said to him, I'm going to give you 6 months, and I said, if you don't like the business, get out of it. I don't want you around. And because a lot of family businesses go under because of arguments among the members. And so we opened a store in Arlington and Lakewood, that's on the south side. And then that didn't do too well, and within a couple of years we closed that and moved further out into Mandarin, where Mark manages the store. And that didn't do very well, so we closed that up. And we've had a lot of movement in our business trying to find the answers. But anyhow, so we concentrated on the one in Avondale and the one at the beaches. And we kept doing pretty well. We were making a decent salary and building up the business. The business was founded in 1966, so it's a family business that's been around a long time, which is quite interesting. However, we lost our lease in St. John's Avenue shopping because the guy was raising the rent way up, so we moved out further to Herschel in where we are today, in a little larger building and a much better access, better parking, more people going by. And that's done very well there. It's still there and doing very well. Well, Alva and I did a lot of traveling since 1972 on, and it was a very wonderful experiences, and we learned a lot. But our first trip was to Spain in 1972, and we went to, we flew into Malaga, which is in the southern part, and beautiful hotels in the Costa del Sol, which is the southern part of Spain. The Germans love to vacation there. And we took bus trips up to in the interior to these white houses, and they're very native villages. And there was most of the small towns had a fountain or water in the center of the town. The women would be out there washing the clothes, and it was a very interesting experience. And they lived off, a lot of them lived off olives, were a very big product, and because olive trees I don't think bear until after 50 years. So if you have an olive grove, you probably have to give it to your grandchildren. But anyhow, so we traveled around the southern part, and we went to the hotels. We had some very fine hotels along the Mediterranean where we had some big, nice feasts. And then we flew into Madrid and went to the Prado, the famous museum, and we walked the streets. We were going to go to a bullfight, but it rained, so that was canceled. And then I remember in Spain, it's like in Italy, people honk their horns all the time, and they just crowd the streets, and my gosh, you might even run you over on the sidewalk. But also we went into the Royal Palace, and it was just one large corridors, huge corridors, just unusual amount of fine paintings. And we visited Toledo. In about the 10th or 11th century, Toledo was a center of learning and culture for the whole world, because it was a place where the greatest Jewish writers, philosophers, Western, the Christian community and the Muslims community, they all gathered in Toledo. So it was, at one time, it was a center of intelligence, or the intelligentsia. But anyhow, we enjoyed Spain, and then after Spain, we went to, as I recall, we went to England to. That was a fine. I think Alba enjoyed that one very much, because we went to Westminster Abbey, all the other places, St. Paul's, Trafalgar Square, and then we took a trip on a train. The trains were very, very good. They were fast, level. I mean, they could serve you tea and crumpets and it wouldn't even spill. And we went on up to Shakespeare, to Stratford upon Avon, because I was very interested in that, because I had memorized Shakespeare's epitaph. And I remember when we went to his church and we were coming out of it, I said to one of the guide, the British guide, I said, Shakespeare's supposed to be buried here. Where is he buried? And she just flung her hand. She said, up in that corner, there was sarcophagus, up there, she was up in that corner. And she was wrong, because a little minister followed me and heard me, and he said, look, come on here and I'll show you. So he took me back, and we stood in front of the altar, in the front of the altar. Shakespeare was buried. And so I stood on his grave and read the epitaph, which I had memorized. It says, good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dirt enclosed here. Blessed be he that spares my bones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. And you know, Shakespeare has never been moved to the Westminster Abbey. He's still buried there in that church. But I almost missed it. It was one of the high points of my trip. And then we went to the house where he lived, and around the countryside is beautiful. We visited a few castles and so forth, and then We went back when we were in London. We saw the Tower of London and the various sites throughout England. Then I think after England, if I remember right, we took several cruises in the Caribbean. We flew to Miami, then to San Juan, and I remember we went to Caracas, Venezuela. We landed on the northern shore, and we took a bus. I don't know, it might be 25 miles. We took a bus on into Caracas. Caracas is the capital, and it's at about 5,000 feet, so there's mild climate. Even though it's close to the equator, it's a mild climate. And Alva was very depressed because when we were going in, we could see on the side of the hills all these poor people living in shacks and cardboard boxes and everything else, and it's just strewn all over the place. The poverty was just absolutely fabulous. Well, I don't say fabulous, horrendous. Then we went into the city. The city is nice. It's a beautiful modern city, clean. And then from there, the thing I remember is we went up on the lift. We went up to mountains. I guess it was about 12,000 feet up over the city. And we got in a cable car with a cable hanging down in the cabin. There was about 5 of us in that, and we were coming down. It was about 50 degrees up there when we got to the top, and then we got in the little carriage, hanging by the cable, and we went over the city, 12,000 feet up, and it was a spectacular view. It's very famous, and it was a big tourist attraction, but it was kind of exciting to be at that height and hoping that the cable would hold. But we got down fine, and then we went back to our ship. We cruised the rest of the Caribbean, all the islands on up to St. Thomas and so forth. Then we got back, I think we got back to Puerto Rico and then flew back home on that trip. In the recent years, I guess in the last 10 years, we flew to Arizona, rented a car with another couple from who were friends of ours from West Palm Beach, and we went to it was an elder hostel. We drove the car up through Arizona, and the topography changes greatly because it's so dry and lack of vegetation in Phoenix. But then as you go north, you get more and more vegetation until finally you reach the rim of the Grand Canyon, and there's a lot of trees. And we spent a week there at the Grand Canyon and had wonderful food and lectures, and we walked around. I went down halfway down the canyon and had to get out of the way of the people coming up with the mules. You couldn't ride those mules. If you were over 200 pounds, you couldn't ride the mules. But anyhow, that was a very good trip. I think the Grand Canyon is something that's so spectacular, it's almost impossible to imagine how beautiful it is and majestic. Another trip we took was to Mexico City. I won a trip, and it was for 2. So Alva and I went. We flew into Mexico City. Mexico City is on a plateau of 6,000 feet. Even though it's near the tropics, it's a very cool climate. I mean, nice climate at that, because it's a 6,000 foot elevation. And it's quite a modern city. The parts we were in, we stayed in a Hilton hotel, and we walked the streets and looked at all the old sites and the churches and so forth. And then we went out to see the pyramids, and we took a cab out. And again, Alva was she wasn't happy with the trip because everybody, all the kids were begging for food, and they were so poor. It just got to her. And but anyhow, We had good accommodations, and I didn't do any of their drinking any of their water, but I just drank cerveza, which is beer, and but I liked the trip, but Alva didn't particularly. But it was, going to Mexico City is just like going into a different. When we went to Europe, I mean, we could identify with the cultures, but when we went to Mexico City, the cultures were so different, and it was kind of fascinating. And then we went to the museums and other places of interest. One of the recent trips we took was our children gave us a trip on our 50th wedding anniversary to Alaska, and we flew from Jacksonville to Houston to Vancouver, and in Vancouver we boarded a ship and took the inland passageway on up. We went to the capital and then on up to Valdez, where they had the big oil spill, and then we came to Stewart, which is in the south side, and we took a bus from there after we got off the ship, and we took a bus trip, I don't know, maybe 100 miles or more, into Anchorage. And at Anchorage, we flew to Fairbanks, and Alaska has a lot of mineral wealth, a lot of mountains, snow-capped mountains, and the scenery is quite nice, but I wouldn't want to have any part to do with it. It's so far away, actually. It's about 5 or 6 zones from us, but it's that we got, after Fairbanks, we had very good accommodations, actually, and I did a little mining there. They had a little setup for mines, and then we got a train, which is very slow moving, probably no more for the 25 or 30 miles an hour because of the permafrost. See, Alaska stays frozen on the ground, and it's not very stable, so the trains can't travel very fast. And then we went to Denali, which is a big park, and we cruised through there. I didn't see too much wildlife, some wild, I don't know, I didn't even see a moose. That was a little, they promised a lot, but we didn't see too many mountain goats. We saw those. But anyhow, Denali is a big park, and we stayed there for overnight in good accommodations. And then we continued on our trip back to Fairbanks, which is probably about 400,000 people, very modern looking city. Alaska, I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't even want to work there, but it's all right. I mean, a lot of people do, but it's a rich country for us. But then at Anchorage, we had to have our bags out at 3 o'clock in the morning and outside our door, and then they picked them up, and we went to the airport, and it was one of the longest airplane rides I ever had. From Anchorage, we flew to Salt Lake City, and then Salt Lake City to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati to Jacksonville. But it was a long, long trip, and we got all that done in one day. But I guess the day was much longer because of the time changes. And so Alaska was an interesting experience, but as I said, I wasn't too impressed with it. I wouldn't want to live there. Then one of our most recent trips, we took a 15-day trip to Europe, and we flew to Amsterdam and went all along Belgium and Amsterdam. We went to Antwerp. We went to, from Amsterdam, we went to Belgium, then to Germany. And Germany's a very pretty country, a lot of agriculture. The towns generally are clustered. I guess it's sort of to preserve the land for agriculture. The towns are clustered generally in the valley. It's very clean. So we went through Germany, and then we went into Munich. And at Munich, we had lunch and toured the city and went to the beer halls, had some beer, and then walked around. And Munich is an interesting city. Of course, that's where Hitler got started. And then from Munich, we went on to Austria, and that was beautiful. Austria, the mountains are just fabulous and snow-covered. We had beautiful accommodations in Austria. The motel we stayed into was very elegant. They even had wall-to-wall. I had Oriental rugs in the halls, and they had great dining, and it was beautiful. I got out and walked. We stayed there a few days. I got out and did quite a lot of walking. It was very interesting. And then we left Austria, and then we went across the Brenner Pass, and that's quite famous. And and that took us over into Italy, and we went to Lake Como, and across northern Italy through Verona. We had been to Verona before, and then from Verona we went on up to Switzerland, which I think is one of the most beautiful places that you could go to. And we toured Switzerland. This were on a bus. And then from Switzerland we went on into France, and from there to Paris. And we had a big meal in Paris before we left. And we got out to see the sights at night, the City of Lights. And we did a bus tour of the city down the Champs-Élysées and to the roundabout where all these people come in about 8 different sections, and there's no lights. The cars just come in like a bunch of bugs, and they circle around and go out. Nobody gets hit. And I just stand there fascinated about how they dodge each other. It's like fish in a fish tank. But I thought that was very interesting. So we got to see. Then we went during the day. We went to the Louvre, but we couldn't get in because of the long lines, and we didn't have enough time. But then we went to Tuileries Gardens, and then we saw Napoleon's tomb, and then we walked along the banks of the Seine. The artists had their stuff spread all over the sidewalks, and they had a lot of artwork for sale. And then we crossed over the Seine and went into the Notre Dame Cathedral. And but we didn't spend too much time in Paris. Actually, if I had my way, I would like to have an apartment in Paris for about 6 months, just to live there and explore it, because I found it very, very fascinating. Well, anyhow, we left there, and we had to wait about 8 hours. Our plane had to have something done to it, and we flew back to the United States. Now, the best trip, I think that Alva, above all, was England was one of them, but she loved Italy. So we went to Italy, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but our daughter, Teresa, had an apartment there because she was working for the Florida State University overseas study program, and she was a librarian. So she had an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building, and she invited us over. So we went over there for 2 weeks, and we toured Italy pretty well. We went by on a bus to Assisi, and then we went to Rome, all the Spanish Steps, and the Vatican, St. Peter's, the Vatican Museum. Then we took a bus. Then after Assisi, after that, we took a bus all the way up to Venice, and that was interesting. We stayed in Venice a couple days, And the Venice is like things like Disney World, but it has beautiful architecture, and the boatmen at night, you could hear them in their boats singing the songs, and the food was great, and I don't know how long we were there. We're about maybe a couple days in Venice, and then we left Venice and went to, was headed home, so we went back across northern Italy to, through Verona and back to Milan. And at Milan, we had enough time that we decided to go see the Last Supper, and we went to the church on the outskirts. It was a long walk, but anyhow, I had studied a little, for a year I had studied enough Italian that I was able to ask directions to get around. It was very helpful, but anyhow, at this church, we walked into this room, and when I walked into the room, I looked on the back wall, and there was the painting by Leonardo da Vinci, and the composition was so great on the back wall that I felt like I had walked right in on Jesus and his disciples at dinner. It was so, I don't know, it just grabbed you. But you know, since that time, right after that, they shut it down for restoration. So we were fortunate to be able to see it. So we went back and to the city, central city, where we stayed overnight, and the next day we took a plane back to the United States. Alva really liked it. She visited every church and lit a candle. She lit a candle in every church. Italy is like a museum from one end to the other. If I had all kinds of money in the world and time, I'd rent a villa on the Mediterranean and just study Italy from one end to the other, because it is so old and it's landscaped. You see, people live there so long, but it's landscaped so beautifully, and it's got mountains running down the center of it too. I was in our mountain house one summer, and I got a call from NBC Productions from a man who was assistant to Tom Brokaw, and they said they had read the letters that had been written to me by the next of kin in the war, and I had turned them over to the Florida State University Museum for the World War II, and they had called FSU and asked them if they had anything of compelling interest that they could use, and they turned my letters over to Tom Brokaw's Productions, which I didn't know anything about. They turned that and something else over, and they decided, they called me, and they said they thought the letters were very compelling, and they would like to talk to me about it. And they, at the time, I forgot all about it. I said, okay. And so I went on about my business. I didn't know anything was going to come of it. So then your mother and I and another couple, friends of ours, took a trip to Lubeck, Maine, which is the most northernmost and eastern city in the United States. And we rented a house there from a friend of mine on the Bay of Fundy, where the tides come in real high. You could see them so we could see it. That's another trip was interesting. So we went to, we were in Lubeck, Maine. It's right on the border of Brunswick, Canada. And we also had visited Capobello, where Roosevelt's summer home. So we went through that too. But anyhow, in the meantime, we were having dinner at the friends of ours had asked us over for dinner, and while we're at dinner, I get a call from Mark. I thought, God, what's wrong? And Mark says, they want you to come home. I said, who? He said, NBC, they want you to come home. They want to interview you. And I said, well, I'm here up in Maine. I can't do that. And he said, well, they'll be in touch with you. You go home. And he said, you go to the airport at Asheville and pick up. They got made all the arrangements. So when we left home, we went to the airport, and they had already paid our way back to Jacksonville. They had made all the arrangements, and then when we got to Jacksonville, they had already rented a car for us. So we got home, and then they set up to come and interviewed me in our living room. They had sent up a crew from the north and one from Tampa, and they set all this equipment up and made the living room look like a studio. And they had a lot of technicians there, and they did this interview of me and reading the letters and going over all the information. And see, Tom Brokaw wasn't there at that time. He had his people doing it because he does these productions for TV and sells them, I think. But anyhow, they went with me to watch my grandchildren play soccer. They sent somebody down to watch me play tennis. I mean, they just took a lot of pictures and things. But you realize that they do this because later on, when they get down to it, they only use a very small portion of it. But summer before the 9/11 attack, and he said he would like to interview me, and so he came to Jacksonville, and I think he also had another program going on anyhow. So I said, okay, it's fine. So he came over, and he set it up in St. Paul's Church with all the stained glass windows. We sat in the pews, and he had all the equipment there and photographers and everything running, and he sat there, and we talked, and he asked me a lot of questions. It's in the interview, and he knew what he was doing. He was very, very nice. It was easy to deal with, and he was very complimentary to Father Sullivan about the stained glass windows. He was interested in those. But anyhow, so we had the interview, and so they told me that later they would let me know when they were going to run the program. It was, I guess, about a month or so later that they ran it in, I don't remember the dates, but I think it was in June. It was on Father's Day, that's right. So they ran it on NBC, I think it was at 10 o'clock. They had a segment, four segments of the hour show dealing with veterans and their relationships to their families, about how the families reacted to their war experiences. And mine was the last segment, and it was the 15-minute segment. And you'll see it on if you have it, you'll see it on the interview. And I got a lot of response from it, and it was quite an interesting experience. Finally, to complete this, I would like to make a tribute to the most important person in my life, is my wife, Alva. And she was born in Jacksonville on October 5th, 1926, on the steps of St. Vincent's Hospital. When it was on the north side, they closed the doors at 8 o'clock when her mother arrived to give birth. And I don't know if the doctor ever got there or not, but the tradition is that she was born on the steps of St. Vincent's. She was from a prominent family here in Jacksonville. Her great-grandfather was a sea captain, and it was a superintendent of the Clyde Mallory lines, which were a very big line that traveled up and down the East Coast. And he was a force in Jacksonville, and very well known, and he was a harbor master. I guess you'd call it a harbor master for Jacksonville ports. So Alva has deep roots in Jacksonville, and she went to school at St. Paul's Catholic grade school, and then she went on to Lee, where she graduated, and then from there she went on to college. I always said she has a very elegant background because she had deep roots in Florida. Her her ancestors were settlers in western Florida, around Tallahassee before Florida became a state. That's before 1840. She also has deep roots in Georgia, and her great-grandfather was a surgeon in the Civil War, and she has deep roots in New England. As a matter of fact, she's a descendant of the governor and the proprietor of Martha's Vineyard. His daughter married a Tupper, and Alva's descended from them. I always said she had great descendants, and I was a mongrel. But anyhow, but we were married in Tallahassee, Florida, in a mission church, a Catholic mission church on Adams Street. We had a beautiful wedding, and a lot of people from Jacksonville came over, and that was in 1948. On November 20th, we were married, and I've always found my wife, to be a very fine lady and very well liked. She had many, many friends. She didn't like small talk or gossip, and her friends trusted her and confided in her. And she loved to joke. She loved to tell jokes and so forth. But our marriage, 63 years of marriage, ended about 5 years before she died. She got Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and it became progressively worse, and she died on October 20th, 2011 at the age of 86. Her mother had previously, 12 years before that, her mother had died at the age of 97. She also had Alzheimer's disease. So it's sort of a family genetic trait. And but Alva and I always, we raised our children, we even saved money, and we shared the same values. And she was the love of my life, and I miss her greatly. I remember when she always supported me. That's one thing I knew. She loved me all the time. She supported me, whatever I did. She supported me, and we tried also in our relationship to have our own interests, and we never impinged on each other's interests. We supported each other because we knew we didn't enter marriage to change somebody. We entered marriage that we could enrich each other's lives, which I think we really did, and we shared everything, and we had no secrets. So I thought I have an ideal marriage, and it was a great blessing. And but anyhow, the night I knew she was going to die, and the night she was lying in the bed, and the night before she died, and she sort of turned to look at me very vaguely, and then she took a hold of my hand and kissed the back of my hand. That said everything. So that's Alva. She's a grand lady, very refined, and I was blessed to have her as a wife. Here are a few precepts after a long life that I would like to leave you with. Number one, keep and try to maintain good health. If you do that, you can do almost anything you want. Good health is a foundation for anything you want to do. Without it, you have a real handicap. Secondly, get a good education. I guess I'm talking to my grandchildren now. And remembering that it is a lifelong job. Education doesn't stop when you leave formal schools, but it's a continuing knowledge. Knowledge is the most important thing. It isn't what you think, it's what you know. Try always to get your best, and try always to do your best, for you seldom get a second chance. Then also practice the social graces. By that I mean the golden rule: do unto others as they would do unto you. And in other words, it's probably the greatest virtue, the love of your fellow man.